Well, what an extraordinary 48 hours it's been. The death of His Royal Highness, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, has led to this outpouring of grief and sorrow, but also, I think, a warm celebration of a life and a man the world genuinely liked. Now, we've been reminded this weekend of Philip's remarkable role in the Navy, where he was mentioned in dispatches for his bravery. He was no passenger. That was abruptly interrupted, of course, once Elizabeth was coronated in 1953. He reluctantly became the full-time consort to the Queen. Philip was a keen yachtsman, polo player, carriage driver and cricket lover. But what a couple they made, always dignified, showing a great loyalty to the Commonwealth nations they visited, in particular Australia. Philip, in fact, came down under more than 20 times in 72 years. We'll discuss his love of this country with General Sir Peter Cosgrove shortly. But in many ways, Australian history over the last 70 years has been shared with those big royal events. From the coronation in 53, we watched in awe at this very young woman leading the Commonwealth. We followed the couple's children grow up, especially the next king, Charles, and who could forget the time in 1979, a bikini-clad admirer, Jane Priest, stole a kiss on Cottesloe Beach. I think it was a stunt, but he did need an image makeover at the time. There was the Charles and Diana wedding in July 1981, their marriage of 3 in the late 80s, and Diana's terrible death in 1997. In 2002, the Queen lost her mother. We then watched Prince William marry Kate in 2011 and Harry and Meghan 7 years later. And all that time, Philip was always there. But the Queen has now lost her rock.
Queen is very resilient by nature, and she has a very strong religious faith. So I think that is all a help in this time when obviously it's a time of grief as well as of accepting this new situation. But it's one that I think the Queen would have anticipated and would be coping with.
It brings to an end a remarkable partnership. Their marriage has been one for the ages. It spanned, 73 to 74 years. There aren't too many Australians alive now who were alive in 1947 when they married. And they have together set a wonderful example of service and commitment and duty. He was destined from the time he married the then Princess Elizabeth to always walk 2 or 3 steps behind, but he did that with great flair and in great style.
And the flair referred to there by John Howard included his public jokes, those witty asides, which we soon learned straddled the fence between funny and partially offensive to some. He'd open buildings and make fun of the fact he didn't know what the building was for. And then there were more awkward times, like in 2002, when surrounded by a group of Aboriginal dancers, he asked if they still threw spears at each other. And he had a healthy scepticism for political correctness, including climate change. It was his son, Charles, who emerged overnight to deliver a very personal tribute.
My dear Papa was a very special person who, I think, above all else, would have been amazed by the reaction and the touching things that have been said about him. And from that point of view, we are, my family, deeply grateful for all that. It will sustain us in this particular loss and at this particularly sad time.
And floral tributes were delivered to Windsor Castle, Buckingham Palace. Nothing like what we saw after Diana's death, but that's because crowds have been discouraged due to COVID-19. And in another sign of the times, the official announcement of Philip's death was first placed on Twitter. We had 41 rounds fired over 41 minutes from London Tower, various English barracks and warships. His passing was notable enough to pause the House of Commons, but not the running of the Grand National or the UK's beloved Premier League matches. That says something too. In Australia, a commemoration service was held at Sydney St Andrews, and the Prime Minister had this to say afterwards.
An opportunity today, I think, for the world to pray for the royal family and Her Majesty in her profound sorrow. But also, I think, to reflect on again on that life of service that we heard about this morning. A man of loyalty, a man of devotion, not just to his homeland, but to all the Commonwealth. From his many visits here, and for those of all the royal family. We may be a long way away from his homeland, but today we are very close.
And so the final chapter in this most admired life will be held at a ceremonial funeral next Saturday, 3 p.m. at St George's Chapel at Windsor Palace. No state funeral, no pomp. He didn't want any of that. COVID too has had a say, with only 30 members of the family allowed to be inside the chapel for the televised service. And in typical Philip form, his instructions included having his coffin leave the chapel inside a Land Rover that he himself designed for the occasion. I think it's worth remembering Philip's final public duty, aged 96, saluting the Royal Marines. He was Captain General of the Marine Corps for 64 years, a leadership he cherished. And on that day, in August 2017, he carried out his final duty to perfection in the pouring London rain.